This time aside is a special time in our day. As we gather to worship and learn together, we light this candle remembering that Jesus is the light of the world. In him we see light, and in him we are light. So we'll open our time today in prayer. Let's pray together. Creator God, thank you for gathering us together this morning. Thanks for this group of people. Help us to be open to where this conversation can take us. Thank you for Lance, for New City Neighbors and their work to grow systems where people are empowered to use their talents and all people have access to nourishing food. Cultivate our resilience and expand our imagination so that we might continually find new ways to answer your call. In your name we pray. Amen. So, thank you everybody for being here. This is part of our On Sacred Ground series. We've been asking people to come in and talk about just different parts of the community that are working on food and environmental justice and land sustainability. And Lance is here today from New City Neighbors. We're excited to hear about your work and your organization. Just a little bit about Lance first. He has been, I took this right out of your bio, been engaged in social enterprise work for 10 plus years, including urban farming, cafe management, and building renovations. He holds a BA from Calvin and an MDiv from Regent College. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great.
You're all mic'd up, right?
I am. I think, can y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So I just met Nick. Nick is going to ask the extremely challenging questions on today's presentation, so I appreciate that.
As per usual.
I see some familiar faces. I really am grateful to be here. I really enjoyed y'all's service here. I can tell you have a very vibrant community, and that was a great presentation of the Word, and the Ruth story was quite beautiful. So what a gift for me to be here. It's very rejuvenating to go to different communities sometimes because you don't have any jobs or any work to do, so you can just come and receive. But my goal is just kind of give a little bit of a brief introduction to New City Neighbors and to our work via slideshow, and I do really love conversation over me talking a lot. So if at any point a slide catch your interest or I wasn't being clear, then if Nick doesn't pipe up and ask a really hard question, then feel free to do that, and then we can just have a conversation. And then I heard that, Brian is here too. Hi, Brian. I hear that the kids need to get picked up at 12:15, so if we wrap up and we're really on time, then that's great. And if we're having a lively discussion and you're a parent and you need to head out, then that's great too. I'm a parent, I have 3 children, and so this is also why this is a gift to be here, because I'm at worship service without my kids. Cool, so New City Neighbors, that's an organization that I have been with for about 12 years now, and I'm the operations director there. Ricardo Tavares is our executive director. He would have been doing this, but he is on a needed sabbatical after 4 or 5 tumultuous years of New City Neighbors, and those of us who are close to the org and kind of know our history know that we've kind of been through it all since COVID. So. But our mission is to empower youth to reach their full potential. So we're kind of thinking about food, but it's important to kind of know that our organization is actually a youth-centered organization first, and then food for us is a strategy to do that work. But that's gotten us really into food via an urban farm and a cafe. But we're not necessarily a food or a food organization, but we kind of are at this point because that's what we do. And then our vision is to grow neighborhood leaders, and so kind of the little subtle difference between that mission and vision. When we're thinking about empowering youth, we're doing that through youth employment largely and kind of thinking about resourcing them at a young age. And then the reason we're doing that is so hopefully they become invested in our neighborhood and community, and then they can take the reins and being leaders in that community so that I can reach life in peace. And then our values, we have 3 main values. We're youth-centered, so I kind of just named that value. And then we have this value of radical hospitality, which I heard consistently in this morning's service, which I really appreciated. Wanting to be inclusive to everybody and anybody that's in the neighborhood. We have renovated this old 1890s farmhouse, and so that's where our offices is and our program space is, and so that value kind of emerged. As we were being we had lost rights to land that we had had and that we were growing on, and it was kind of an exclusionary process. And so we felt the pains of being excluded and knew that we really wanted to create a place where that wasn't going to happen, and that anybody who walked into this new space that we were being given would feel completely welcome. So that's where that value kind of came in. And then we have this value of holistic ministry, which I think I also heard in the refrains and in the liturgy that your community was saying with one another.
Lance, this isn't a tough question, but just a question for the group, whether or not people know physically the geography of where you're located now.
Yeah, thank you. So right now we are located on the corner of Fuller and Fulton. And so if you know the family fair there's kind of a Big Beef Coffee that's across the street. We're behind the Big Beef Coffee. The farmhouse itself is right on Leonard Street, and now has a New City Neighbors sign on it, but we're right next to a gas station. You would totally miss it, and we've been there for about 3 or 4 years now, and the growing space is behind that. So I have had some aerials that will kind of help give you a little bit of space, but yeah, thanks.
The bulletin says northwest, but that's northeast, right?
Yes, what does it say?
The whole, it says
It
northwest?
says northwest.
Oh, yeah, no, we're on the east side. Cool. So whenever I'm at a church, I like to talk about what holistic ministry means to us. I think y'all already got this from what I kind of figured out from just kind of hearing the liturgy of what y'all are doing. But Ricardo and I kind of talk about it in the sense of a ministry grid. And so kind of the way a lot of faith communities start thinking about what ministry means to them is they kind of start in that first box, the spiritual box. And so a lot of their work is around spiritual discourse, around discipling people as to what the scriptures mean, educating them, leading good worship services. It's kind of in that spiritual realm, right? And then as they do that work, they know that the gospel calls them to love their neighbor as themselves, and they start thinking about mercy work. And so a lot of faith communities will kind of have like a food pantry or some kind of ministry out to the community where those with resources are giving to those who don't have resources. A lot of faith communities might stop with those two. I can tell that y'all are definitely moving beyond that, and you're starting to talk about justice, or have been talking about justice for a really long time. And kind of as faith communities serve those who don't have, who are marginalized, you start to ask questions as to why do the same people not have, and why do they look certain ways and those who have look certain ways. And so then you start asking questions about racism or loss of land or whatever have you. And then as you start to do that work, you're hopefully going to start wondering about how can those being affected by injustice be a part of their own solutions to that injustice. And so how could they be developed to become leaders so that they can be an active participant in the work of addressing injustice. And so kind of as you move from 1, 2, 3, and 4, those who are being affected by injustice are going to be much more in the center of leadership, whereas opposed to 1 and 2, a lot of times those who have are in leadership. And so New City Neighbors is trying to move that trajectory 1 through 4. And then ideally you go right back into 1 again. So I do see this as a circle, and then your spiritual discourse becomes richer. Those in the community that have been excluded are a part of the community and being a part of the spiritual discourse, and then you're going to start thinking about mercy work. So it's not like once you go to 1 to 2, like 1 stops or something like that. They're just going around and around in circles. But it's just important, I think, especially for nonprofits, to kind of do the work of 3 and 4. And a lot of times, faith communities and nonprofits work together, and I kind of see faith communities being centered on 1 and 2 a lot, and then they're partnering a lot of times the way that we structure church now with nonprofits that are doing 3 and 4. Does that little grid make sense to y'all? Okay. Yeah, I can tell y'all are experiencing all this stuff. So then, like I said, our strategy is good food. So we have all those values, and then just a brief definition of what good food is. So there's actually like a whole movement around good food. So there's a Michigan Good Food Charter. And so there's this large movement around how we can make food good again, because food can be a really beautiful thing where we extend hospitality to one another and receive the gifts of God and share with one another the gifts of God. And it can also be a really toxic thing. It's worth imagining and remembering that some of the worst parts of us have been around food, right? And so this country was founded on taking large swaths of land to grow food, and then we exploited large swaths of people and created a slavery system to then grow that food for free for other people. And so food has been this really toxic thing for us as well. And so we haven't undone that toxic history yet. So we're all really quite used to food being quite cheap. We're used to exploiting labor to have food at the table. And that's a real shame, because then as we gather around the table to share the gifts of God, there's got to be a part that we're mourning a little bit too, that maybe there hasn't been equity in this food that's on the table. And so that kind of steals some of the gift and the joy that a meal can have. And so good food would be accessible, just meaning everybody should be able to have access to it. There wouldn't be any haves and have-nots. And then it would be equitable. We have the same amount of food at the table. It's not a food where the person at the end of the table has the big pot roast and the other person on the other side has some crackers, right? That wouldn't be a meal that I would like to enjoy. It's fair, it's healthy, and then it's diverse. And then those values and that strategy have kind of emerged into 3 programs for us. And so then we have a farm. So this is a 4-acre social enterprise. I'm going to define that term in a second, so just wrap it. If you're like, why did you just throw out the social enterprise term? I don't know what that means. And so then we are growing a bunch of vegetables for people. We now have 3 growing sites, and so we used to be on the property of Fourth Reformed Church up until 2020. And then when Ricardo was hired, Ricardo is a pastor in the community. He's also a queer pastor, and that church was not having that. And so then right after he was hired, within about 2 or 3 weeks, they told us we weren't allowed to use the land anymore. So we had built an urban farm on that church's 2-acre property for about 8 or 9 years and had a bunch of greenhouses and this thriving farm and youth employment program, and we've been having to move. So when you've been hearing me allude to the trauma of being excluded, that's what I'm naming. I'm kind of tired of telling the story. You know, like traumatic stories, you get exhausted from telling them. I'm definitely at that point. And Ricardo's on sabbatical because he's definitely at that point. But it is an important part of our story. And so then, as we lost that land, we were able to then, Grand Valley University reached out to us, and they had a student farm out in Allendale, and they said, hey, we're struggling to maintain this land. We just want to teach college students about farming, and college students aren't around in the middle of the summer, and that's when a lot of vegetable growing happens. And so we have some land that we could offer y'all, and so that was a gift of hospitality extended to us, and so then we developed a growing site there. So then we manage an acre of land out there. And then in the fall and the spring, when the college students are around, we happily receive them as volunteers to our work. And then it's been kind of a nice win-win partnership. And then as we were in that, I was just telling Nick, and I can't remember your wife's name?
Deanna.
Yeah, okay. I was just telling them the story of being in this loss of land, and then one of our farm shareholders lived on Herrick, which they lived on Herrick Street for a little while, so that's really interesting. And they called us up and said, hey, there's this land across the street that's for sale, like, y'all might be interested in it. And I was kind of to the point of not looking at those emails anymore, because land in Grand Rapids is really expensive. So, like, we're not gonna be able to afford the 1 million acre lot that you're talking about. And then if we could, it's probably covered in lead and arsenic or something. We wouldn't be able to grow vegetables on it. And then there was this farmhouse there with land behind it, and it was affordable because the house was in total disrepair, and I think the Lord's favor was upon us. And we then got our new office space, which is this renovated farmhouse that I'll show you photos of, and the land behind. And now we're also growing up at Plainsong Farm in Rockford. So we have lost total access to that original 2 acres this spring, and so we had to take down all of our, we call them high tunnels, and we needed a new place to move them, and that urban location wasn't large enough for that. So we've been growing in Rockford now too. So we are in the city, and then we're out that way, and then we're out that way. And then we also have a cafe that we run, and so then we have a commercial kitchen where we do a pop-up restaurant every Thursday, which is a lot of fun. We're going to go till November 6th, so we've got a couple more Thursdays. I know Deborah is like there almost every Thursday, so you can just go with her. And so then it's just a lot of fun to kind of have wood fire pizza, soup, salads. The youth help do that all week, and then serve our guests with whatever was been growing off the farm. And then we also do like community development programming where we have like a fall festival. We do a lot of gardening and educational classes. out to the community as well. And so I told you I would tell you all what social enterprise meant. If you don't know, hopefully now you know. So it's just kind of this merger. I normally tell anybody that if they're talking about social enterprises, you immediately have to lift up both of your hands. And this diagram kind of shows that. So it's like, are you a nonprofit? Are you a business? Yes, yes. You're both of those things at the same time. And so then for the urban farm, for example, we are like a normal small-scale vegetable farm. And so then we grow food. We generate about $140,000 a year from revenue grown from people like Ryan or Deborah who buy our farm shares. And then they come every Thursday to pick up vegetables. And then that helps fund and sustain that program. And then our social outcome is to do youth employment at the same time. So then we can hire 10 high school students for the farm portion. It's a good first-time meaningful job for them, which is a really important thing for communities that aren't connected to good work. And so a lot of times connections to good work require connections. And if you don't have those connections, you will be excluded from good work. And then you'll kind of be pushed to like the fast food area of work, or you're going to be pushed to factory work or something like that. I'm the child of a small business owner, so when I was in middle school and getting suspended, he would bring me out to the construction site and he said, "This is why you should stay in school." He didn't know that it was backfiring because I realized I really enjoyed working with my hands and I was having more fun when I was out there. And so that's how I got into what I am in now, where I was doing a construction social enterprise for a little while, and I realized I like to do social work and I like to do really hands-on dirty work. Like that's how I get to know y'all. I'm pretty awkward if I don't know you, but if I'm digging carrots with you, you and I will become friends really quick. So that's kind of how that works. And then it happens on a continuum, and so this is a helpful thing to see. And so then, like I said, you kind of have some that you have a traditional charity, and you also have a traditional business. Like the dead center would be like you're able to do the business side and completely cover your costs for your social outcome at the same time, and that would be like you're right in the center. We're not there. We're probably around the, it's hard for me to point to it, but where it says potentially self-sustaining, 75% of market value. We're in that green, but we're just to the left towards traditional charity. So like our goal is to cover about 80% of our program costs. And so youth employees are awesome. They're also very inefficient. It's their first job. We're definitely, working out the kinks of if this is your first time job, right? And then we're also moving through employees that are more rapid quick, where we're trying to keep bringing in new employees into the space. And so that slows us down a lot. We also do fun things like going on field trips, and you're not contributing to the bottom line in those moments. Doing leadership classes, and so you're not quite fully sufficient. But then donations and grants can make up that gap, but we're not so beholden to an unsustainable revenue stream. So like if a grant goes away, we're using that grant to build infrastructure for a greenhouse or something like that, but then grants come and go, and so then we're hopefully in a more stable and a sustainable space. Does that social enterprise term make sense to anybody? Any quick questions on that one?
Is that a relatively new term? I've just never...
I started hearing about it when I was at Regent College around 15 years ago, and I felt like it got really popular in nonprofit circles, like starting maybe like 10 years ago. I think a lot of nonprofits were like, cool, this sounds like free money. And then they all started creating social enterprises, and they're like, oh, this is wicked hard. And they all kind of like had a bunch of social enterprises that went bankrupt immediately, and then now it's kind of balancing out a little bit. But yeah, it's somewhat new, yeah.
And where would like a triple B Corp be on this? Would that be?
Yeah, so you see that, it's actually right on the circle, it's in the green.
Okay.
It's just one click over, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious, Lance, about, so the loss of the property, the church property, and then these, awesome gifts of the GDSU connection and the Plains Talk, but I'm wondering about transportation costs kind of
Sure.
adding to that.
Yeah, it's definitely like we were really spoiled to be a farm all located in one space, so certainly we're paying for people to be driving around a lot more, and we have vehicles that are, we're putting a lot more strain on them than we used to. So we used to have a negligible fuel costs, and we used to have negligible vehicle maintenance costs, and that's definitely become a line item on the budget now that we take a lot more seriously, right? I do remind myself that we were really blessed as an urban farm to have no transportation costs, and that most small-scale vegetable farms are generally in Rockford or generally in Allendale, and they're driving around doing wholesale deliveries, and they're doing farmers markets and those type of things. We just kind of do it the reverse way, where our customers are coming right to us, but then we're driving out to those sites. But is it ideal? Absolutely not. But like the story this morning, when pressed, you do what you need to do to survive. And so that's, it wouldn't be a strategic decision, but that's kind of what you got to do. And we're making it work. We're just starting to make it work. So, yeah. Any other quick questions on that? Yeah.
Do you have some sort of steady stream of donations from the Grand Rapids Foundation or?
Yeah. So sure, our organization before COVID and before that moment that I named was a bit more of a third. So a third of our income as a nonprofit was from the social enterprise revenue. A third was from individual contributions, and about a third was from grants. Now we're around about 40 to 50% grant funded. So the foundations have really responded to what has happened and come in and supported us, which has been awesome. In that moment that I named, we also lost about 40 to 50% of our individual donors. And so there were several conservative donors who tend to be the people with the most money in their bank accounts, who just wouldn't even pick up the phone anymore. So it was also just a loss of land, but it was donors that had been with us for 5 or 10 years and wouldn't pick up the phone anymore. And so that stream of revenue was cut in about half, and now we've restored about 20% of that original loss, but that's still a much smaller portion of the pie that we've been working to build new members in the community, and we're seeing that increase, and I think eventually we'll recover from that. But yeah, that's kind of how that works.
And did you become located in the northeast section there because of your connection with, what was it, Fourth Reformed Church?
Yeah, well, so originally, yeah, when I moved, so y'all heard I went to Regent College in Vancouver. I went to Calvin College, so I was connected with the Grand Rapids area. My wife and I moved back to Grand Rapids in 2012, and we're really passionate about living and working in our neighborhood, and so bought a house right by St. Alphonsus Church when Deborah was the CNA director. And so then I heard about what New City Neighbors was doing at the time. They were doing a bakery with middle school students, and I had this social enterprise background. I had done a construction social enterprise when I was in Vancouver, and I knew that's what I was called to do. I didn't know that I was going to be a farmer or anything like that. And so then I had heard about this bakery that was happening with New City Neighbors. I connected to them and explained this background that I had, and the social enterprise was a little bit of a new concept at the time, and so I was, hey, how could this work for this nonprofit? And then that church had 2 acres of unused land, and I had done an internship with urban farming. 2012 was the housing crisis. Like, seems like we're not in that crisis anymore, right? But at the time, like a third of the houses on my block were vacant. And so a construction social enterprise would have been not a good move. And so then it was like, oh, you have this land. So then an urban farm developed. They were doing a bakery with middle school students. It was a quick jump then to realize that high school youth employment would be a really great space to use that, because they already have those connections with middle school students and didn't have high school programming. And then it was also a re-remembering of why summer vacation was originally started, which was a lot of times youth would go out and work on farms to help with the harvest. And so then it was like, okay, yeah, this isn't an opportunity for urban youth, or really any youth at this point, right? We've mechanized agriculture so much that doesn't happen anymore. But it was a re-remembering of that, and so that's kind of how that happened.
The youth that you serve or employ, are they all Northeast kids? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, what is, I mean, so you take Northeast kids up to Plainsong and Rockford and then out to Allendale?
Yeah, so a majority would be from the neighborhood. We normally kind of hire, so we were 20 youth total during the summer. 10 will be on the farm, 10 will be on the cafe. And then we're gonna interview for that, and then we generally will we'll prioritize youth that are living in the community or worshiping in the community or going to school in the community, because a lot of times youth are going to school in a neighborhood that they don't live in anymore, especially in Grand Rapids. So if you go to school in the neighborhood, we'll still, excitedly hire you because particularly we do after-school employment right now, and so you could be living in a different neighborhood, but you're right in the neighborhood, and it's easy for you to work after. And then we're looking to just balance the crew out in terms of, we have a really fun, diverse crew all the time. Normally 60% of our youth are like BIPOC youth, and then trying to balance on, gender as well, and so then it's just a fun, eclectic group. But we're not necessarily like, oh, we're only gonna work with you if you're low income, or if you're BIPOC, or for BIPOC people of color, or however y'all phrase that. But then we're not like 100% that. It's really one of the most diverse groups that I'm a part of or whatever. And a lot of times like a nonprofit will be like, everybody is meeting this one demographic or something like that. That's not the case with us. It's 20 youth that have shown a passion for the work. So we interview them, but if they're interviewing terrible, it's kind of like, we should hire you because you need to learn how to interview. But we don't want to hire you if you're just getting your mom is just twisting your arm and you don't really want to be there, because it's not going to work out. So we're just kind of gauging, like, do you really want to be here? So if that's helpful.
So it's an old fogey question, but I don't know what a BIPOC person is.
Oh yeah, so it's Black, Indigenous, person of color.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of a newer terminology for person of color. It's hard to keep up with this, so don't feel bad about that at
There's a
all.
lot of acronyms.
Yeah, I caught that one like 3 years ago now, but that doesn't mean anything. That just means I'm in a nonprofit space and you have to keep up with the language.
Quick question related to like faith-based community. So obviously you're at a church presenting, you were at a church previously with like the farm sites, and then there's obviously the exclusion, the part of the story that you shared. How does that connection to faith communities kind of, I guess, how does that still look within the culture of the organization? How much of, how does that even work essentially? Are you partnering with churches as well?
Sure.
Is there some sort of connection to your staff and staffing, and just a little bit curious about that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so it's still like a fundamental value for the org. I'll often say that it feels a little behind the scenes sometimes, but we're in this interesting tension. I'm just gonna have to do this and make it work, I think. Yeah. So how that looks for us in real life is we are in this interesting tension where one of our values is holistic ministry and another is radical hospitality, and sometimes those things exist in tension with one another. And so we want that initial experience for everybody to be like, you're completely welcome here. Like, if you don't have a faith background, you're Muslim, whatever, like, we don't want you to feel excluded in any way from like youth employment or participation in any of our programs. We want you to feel like 100% completely at home. And I feel like that's that embodiment of radical hospitality. Holistic ministry still informs the why of everything that we're doing. And then we have partnered with GRIL, so it's the Grand Rapids Initiative for Leaders. And so it's a leadership program that's explicitly faith-based and explicitly Christian. And so then youth employees can opt into that in their second year if they're interested in doing that specific leadership program. So that initial youth employment experience won't have any elements of faith in it. They might understand that this is why we're doing what we're doing, but it's not like we're praying or we're doing a Bible study or any type of thing. We're kind of actually more trying to build common ground consensus. Like, we care about justice, we care about food systems and equity and the things that like all young people I think can resonate with, all humans can resonate with. Like, we all kind of in our bones know those things. And then we're not going to kind of get into why as Christians we value those things until a little bit later in the game. And so then we have 6 youth right now that are enrolled in that Grow You program. And so that's where kind of faith is happening for those specific leaders, with the hopes that Christian narrative will resonate with why they're doing what they're doing. Does that kind of get at you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Uh-oh.
There's a tough one.
You have referenced several times connections with schools.
Yeah.
I grew up 100 miles north of here, and I was offered 4 years of agriculture, Future Farmers of America, and all this stuff. in this more urban setting, what has been, what could be potential connection with the local school systems?
Yeah. So we have, I'll be honest, we don't have super strong connections to the school systems. Like, that's really just because we've just been having our head down, moving everything. Certainly, obviously, we're employing youth from the surrounding schools. They're aware of us, and when we go to recruit youth, we'll sometimes kind of hop in there. Another reason that we haven't been that connected is every time we open up positions, we have like 40 applications for 20 spots. We've never had a recruitment problem at all. And so it hasn't really forced our hand to kind of get in there, and fly around all the schools and talk to all the teachers, whatever. And then we're so busy dealing with the 40 interviews that we haven't always built those connections. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at there. That's certainly a goal that we're really looking forward to deepening our youth program this year and kind of rebuilding some of those connections, because we're really just emerging out of that crisis of pre-2020, because it really was like we had just a ton of work, and people who saw the site know that I'm not, it was a lot of work. Let me go through.
How could we, as a church, help?
Yeah.
Facilitate awareness, or maybe you have some suggestions later on in your presentation.
Yeah, I'm going to have a slide where y'all can scan a QR code, and then we are launching like an ambassador program so that people that are excited about what we're doing can kind of help spread the word on our behalf. So thank you, Nick. Let me go through a couple more slides, and then we'll see if y'all have more questions after that. So this is just a picture of the aerial, and so that brick building to the top left, is it your top left too? Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to spatially locate myself. That's the Bigby Coffee. And so the farmhouse, you can kind of see the mural of it. It's the very top of the property, but we're actually facing south in this photo.
Looks a lot better than it used to.
Yeah, it does look a lot better. And so then this is the field looking up into the farmhouse. And then this is our GBSU site. So this was when we were constructing. We have a pretty large high tunnel there that's like 30 by 180 foot. We do a 33-week growing season. So we start harvesting the first week of May, and we go all the way to the second week of December. So these high tunnels allow us to grow much more year-round. And like I said, this is our site in Plain Songs. We have a lot of these, we call these caterpillar tunnels, and so they're a little bit more low-tech than the higher tech tunnel that we have. So we had 10 of these that we've been moving, and we rebuilt 4 of the 10. And then the way that most of our paying customers purchase shares is through what's called a community, it's called the CSA share. Sometimes people will throw that acronym out. It stands for Community Supported Agriculture. It's a model of growing vegetable, or a model of purchasing vegetables that kind of originated in the States around the 80s. Some words that it's gone all the way back to the 50s in the States, originated by an African American grower. And then I've heard things that it's started in Asia or in the US, but essentially it's a way for a small scale vegetable farm to have a direct to consumer relationship. Because small scale growing is really hard work, and it's really hard work way to make a living. And so then a lot of times a small scale farm isn't going to be able to come anywhere close to making a living unless they have a direct consumer relationship, because that middle person, the middle people always grab all the money.
And Lance, if I can add, I think one of the cool things about the CSAs is that we as the consumer are taking on some of the risk of those unpredictable pieces of what happens with our weather that affect farming.
Yeah, so Deborah's a star shareholder and she believes in that. And I don't normally talk about that too much because
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just want to name at the same time that we're not going to make you not get any vegetables because we didn't build an irrigation system or something like that, which sometimes people have subscribed to a CSA share with the farm, and that's a really important relationship for both sides to manage. And so like the consumer is saying, yeah, I'm a member now of this farm and I'm taking on some of this risk, and like I'm a committed consumer and like I'm with you. And the farmer better do the same thing. And sometimes I've heard kind of horror stories of other people experiencing CSAs where the farmer is maybe a little bit new to the equation, or maybe they didn't have enough resources to build like an irrigation system or to build a high tunnel thing, and then here's this committed customer and they're getting a bunch of kale every week for 33 weeks and they're like, what do I do with all this kale? And we still might give you that problem a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, but we try our best to not make that a problem and then really take the growing side of the equation really seriously and making sure that we're holding up our end of the bargain and really trying to give our customers as much choice as possible. So sometimes in a CSA, you're gonna only be given, like, here's your 8 vegetables, like, figure it out. We're really trying our best to come up with a craft plan where you can come and we know that people either love or hate beets. Generally, grandma's to blame. Like if grandma made you eat like beets, like there's some trauma there that I'm just not gonna undo for you. No matter how much counseling we have about it, it's just, you're not gonna eat beets again. And so in an ideal world, we would say, okay, you're gonna get a choice of beets or carrots. And generally, like nobody's ruined carrots, so then you can kind of take carrots instead of beets. And so we try to not have as much weird vegetables as well, or that if there is a weird vegetable, that it's a choice. We haven't completely dialed it in yet, but we're getting there. But then you do kind of have like, why on earth are the poblano peppers producing so much more than they did last year? And then it's just like, if y'all want poblanos, take poblanos. Like they're just coming out of our ears. And that's happened to us 2 years in a row, so I don't know what's going on with the poblanos. So sometimes you're gonna get that, and then we're just like, hey, there's just abundance here. If y'all want it, take it. If not, then we're gonna donate it to some of the emergency food centers that we serve. So then another social enterprise, or a social impact that the farm in particular is able to meet is 25% of our produce goes to emergency food centers, or what people often call the food pantry. And so then we partner with Baxter, North End Community Ministry, CCOM, the Other Way Ministries, GRCC has a pantry, North Kent Connect. There's 8 or 9 food centers that we are delivering to every Tuesdays. And so then we partnered with Access to West Michigan, and then they actually are able to get funding to purchase the produce from us so that we can then pay all of our youth employees and have a sustainable program. And then all those sites then are able to have fresh produce. So, and then these are some photos of our cafe program. So this is kind of the inside of this renovated farmhouse, and some of our youth employees practicing radical hospitality in that space. And then, like I said, it's open every Thursday. We've got a lot of beautiful outdoor seating. This time of year, there's a limited indoor seating, so a lot of people are either doing to-go orders or kind of showing up a little bit earlier. And then this is Robin, he's our pizza slinger. He's one of the youth that have been with us a really long time. He's a lot of fun. And then the cafe is also expanding into catering, and we also have been doing prepared sides. So we, if y'all have heard of Community Food Club, I think I saw in your literature y'all helped sponsor Community Food Club. It's awesome. So then some of your dollars are probably coming back to us because they approached us and said, hey, we have a lot of clients that have multiple jobs, they're stressed out, just like all of us, which is why when we go to Meijer, we buy those prepared deli sides because we're tired of cooking. And so then they have started offering prepared deli sides to their clients that come to Community Food Club. And so we prepare those, like we do like a nice macaroni salad and a slaw. And so then every week they have a deli fridge, just like you would have in Meijer with prepared sides, but then that's getting made in our commercial kitchen by our youth employees. And then we're also starting to do small catering gigs. So if you all have like a workplace, or y'all are even, we've been doing this with churches a lot, where they're doing like a potluck, and the people who are in charge of the potluck are tired of all that work. And so then sometimes we'll make a big soup meal for a church or something like that. So holler at us there. And then this is kind of an example of a couple of the community events that I named. We have like a big thing called Gardenpalooza, where we're selling a bunch of plant sales from our greenhouse. And then we're doing free workshops on different gardening topics so that members of the community can get into the joy of growing good food. We also, this is a picture of a panel discussion that we had on racism in the food system. So like I said, we're kind of trying to engage youth as like food is a catalyst for them to start thinking about race and systemic oppression. And how do I lead in that? How do I address that proactively? And so we have a panel discussion about that with a bunch of BIPOC leaders from the community. Now we know. And so that was fun. And then to Brian's question, this is where faith kind of comes in with leadership development with that grill program. And so this is the cohort there, and the young person on the bottom of the stairs is Avery. He's a former youth employee who now leads that program. He's a young adult that works in the cafe 3 days a week, and then he does this Grill You program on Mondays and Fridays. And then those 6 youth are enrolled in that, and it's kind of really in-depth leadership development. They also get enrolled in GRCC classes and start getting early college credits so that they can start thinking about what college can look like for them.
What does GRILL stand for again?
Grand Rapids Initiative for Leaders.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's its own total separate nonprofit, and then they work with other nonprofits to do leadership training. And so we started that program 2 years ago. And then on the horizon, it's so great when the photographer that you're paying $350 to do shows up and there's a rainbow on the sky. Lord is good. So we're really, like I said, we've been in really, I would say, a state of crisis up until, I think the crisis is going to end at the end of this week. We're planting our garlic, and I'm going to sleep a lot. And then we're pretty much done moving everything. And then we're really excited to kind of just retool our youth development program. We're really feeling the need to really equip our youth on the tail end of the program. So I think we have a successful youth employment program. But when they're with us for 2 years or sometimes 3 years, we do kind of do a long-term thing where you're with us the first year, you're just kind of learning the ropes. Your second year, then you're going to be an assistant manager, and you're going to learn about a specific part of it. Like you really resonated with the greenhouse, you're a greenhouse manager. And then when I have a cohort of 10 new students, then my youth greenhouse manager is taking the 2 newbies and then showing them how to pot everything up so that they're starting to learn leadership. The highest form of learning is when you teach somebody else something. There's this really cool continuum thing, but I'm talking to you now in audio-visual form. Y'all remember like 25% of what I'm saying in a little bit. If y'all were leading the workshop, you would remember 90% of it because you have to work your brain a lot more. And so when they do that, when they are then showing other youth what they've learned, it both, one, shows it's peer-to-peer leadership. They're going to listen to a peer a lot more than they're going to listen to me. I'm like a crazy old white hippie guy. You might think I'm not that old, but when you work with high school students, I'm real old. And so then that kind of works that way. And so then what we really would like to build out more is when you are kind of in your 3rd or 4th year, we've developed a lot of partnerships with local businesses, food businesses like Field and Fire Cafe or different businesses in the neighborhood. And so then how can we have youth, they already go to tours to these restaurants, but how can we be a lot more proactive when you're hitting your 3rd or 4th year? Like, hey, here's 3 or 4 local businesses that would be happy to have you. We're going to give you our stamp of you show up on time and you're always really, really reliable or whatever. And if you're not, we're not referencing you so that they pay attention in year 1 and 2. But then they could really kind of move on beyond us. And so that's something that we've wanted to do and we've just had our heads down for a bit. So really looking to do that work this winter. We also just started a new project with Access of West Michigan and Plain Song Farm. So you've already heard that we're already partnering with them. We got a grant funded through the Michigan Health Endowment Fund to really be even more strategic in that work. And then are going to start serving 3 rural food emergency centers. So we've been urban, so a lot of the sites, except for North Kent Connect, are all right in the city of Grand Rapids. And we've been doing some nice ways of doing that work in a way that's a lot more equitable and honoring to everybody involved, and wanting to kind of bring that out into a rural space and figure out how we can maybe collectively fundraise that work together and just kind of take away some of the inefficiencies of having 3 nonprofits working in silos from each other. And then we're also developing a new farm apprentice program for young adults. And so then we've been pretty much kind of ending at the high school level. We've had a couple employees like Avery, who's leading the Grill You program, and Sierra, who was in the photo. She really runs front of house and she's our director of development and plans all our events. Deborah knows because I think you went to the spring fundraiser, right? She led our whole spring fundraiser, which was just this top-notch event. I didn't help her at all, and she's 21. She's just totally phenomenal. But she was a former youth employee that's been with us for a long time. And Avery and Sierra's story is like, we just want more of that. So we're trying to carve out more and more positions for our former high school youth that can stay on the board. those are expensive positions because I can pay you just part-time in the summer. I don't have to worry about, you're maybe like a $4,000 line item. Now all of a sudden you're like a $30,000 a year line item. So adding more and more of those is expensive. But really, I think gets to where we were talking about really generating some real leaders. And we're not going to generate leaders if we just employ a high school student for 8 weeks in the summer. It's going to take a lot more than that. And so I want to see more of that. But then one of the cool things that y'all will probably just maybe start hearing about is that Grand Rapids was designated as one of 17 U.S. cities to be a new urban ag center. And so this was in the last iteration of the Farm Bill. And Michigan lucked out. We got 2 U.S. cities that were granted that out of 17 nationally. You can thank Debbie Stabenow for that because she's a big-time player on the Farm Bill. And so she did whatever those sneaky politicians did and got us some money. And so then Grand Rapids became one of those U.S. cities. And so then we've been working with WEMIAC, so that's the West Michigan Environmental Action Council, I think. They do a lot of environmental work. And so then we're working with them, and then a couple other growers from the community to then develop a program to kind of try to resource more what the USDA calls underserved producers. And so then there's a long history of land exclusion by the USDA. And so the whitest profession in the U.S. is actually farming. So 99% of land-owning farmers are all white males. And so then it's the most skewed demographic of any occupation, and it goes back to that toxic history that I named when we were taking land and then allocating land to only white males. And so like by legal right, the only landowners could be male, and they could only be white. And so that has created all the country being allocated to that demographic, and they still all hold that. And so that's one of the things that we have to unlearn. Yeah.
I'm assuming that statistic is only taking into account the owners of the farm, not the workers as well.
Correct, yes, right. And so then to be the owner, and so that's where all the ownership is lined with white males, but 100%, that's clearly not where all the work is coming from, which is also the same story being played out, right? And so then when labor is required, that's often happening through migrant workers in really poor conditions. And then farm labor is one of the few occupations that you still are not required to pay minimum wage. And so that's that toxic history of where we've gotten used to labor being free, and now you don't need to pay minimum wage for farm labor. But why on earth is that? That's that history. So anyway, then we will have a program where 3 young adults, ideally, we've had a lot of high school youth, start getting into food. And in the past, I'll be honest, when I've been working with youth employees, the first thing I'll tell them, and they start seeming like they want to farm, is tell them stop getting excited about this, because you're not going to. Farming is really, really hard work, and it's a really good way to stay in poverty. It's like another terrible farm statistic is I think it's like one of the largest occupations that still gets like government subsidies, like Medicaid and all that kind of stuff, because farmers are so underpaid. And so then that hasn't been my goal, and then the more and more that this work has been happening, the more specifically I've seen people of color really starting to get more interested in food as well. And so as they've been kind of working through their story and their sense of culture, one of the hearts of culture is food. Like I think the word culture actually is derived from the word cultivate, which is like basically the land is what breeds culture. And the foods that we eat are what's in season to what the land produces, right? And so then if you have some ethnic dish, that ethnic dish, if you trace it back to wherever you came from, is from like whatever was in season at that point in time. Like a ratatouille is from like a bunch of French people, or I think that's Italian people. Like this is what they had in season, right? And then they make this dish of like, let's grab these 10 vegetables that are all in season at the same time. And then that gave rise to that. But, yeah.
Do you have any organized connection with the Hispanic community?
We don't have that as much, yeah. And so like we'll be connecting with, we've connected a lot more with Black entrepreneurs, to be honest. And like, I think that's just because of our immediate specific surroundings. But we haven't really gotten into that migrant worker space that much. And that's something that we should really figure out.
I'll try to fill in for Nick and give you a hardball question here.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that we will you know, since we've been talking as a church about climate and
Yeah.
environment and things like that, one of the ways that we're going to all feel the effects of climate change is through food availability and price inflation and stuff. Is there anything that you are doing in your work that educates or, you know, prepares or whatever about food systems in a changing climate?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly thinking about that. I mean, a lot of people will offer local food as a really tangible solution to climate change, you know, like, I think the climate change conversation is so frustrating because it feels so disempowering, like, okay, yeah, like, I can write another letter to my senator to say, please do something, but we kind of know how that's going to go, so then it's like, what else do we have? And like local food, right, like, we're driving around a little bit right now, like a little bit more than we used to. We used to be like, we're a negative carbon farm because like the amount of carbon that you were breathing, you know, like just walking across the field, like, but really, when you think about a majority of our produce right now is coming from either Florida, California, or Mexico. Having more local food systems, one, creates a resiliency there, where as climate change affects spaces, if all of our food is grown in one space, like, and that space gets wiped out by a wildfire or a drought or whatever it is, we're much more vulnerable as opposed to being spread out. I just actually had like one of these Holy Spirit conversations right after the service. This dude Mark who was behind me, I mean, y'all know who Mark is, wherever he goes to Havana, Cuba sometime.
Oh, Mark Boland.
So he was sitting behind me, and then he was like, oh, hey, are you new here? And I don't normally talk to people, but I felt like I should because like I'm talking and I don't want to be rude to somebody who might come to this thing. So then he was like, oh yeah, and I don't even know why. I was like, oh, he's just like, oh, I go to Havana, Cuba all the time. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Like, that's one of my life goals is to go to Cuba. And then he was just like, oh yeah, and I was telling him why, is because they practice a lot of sustainable agriculture there. And it's by necessity, because the same thing to like kind of that Bruce story where it's like they've been so isolated from the world that they've had to figure out how to grow produce on like they have a lot of urban ag in Cuba because, you know, here's 3 million people in Havana, Cuba, and they have to grow vegetables. They don't have the option of importing the food, and so they have to figure out how to do it. And so there's a lot of ingenuity and creativity around sustainable ag in Cuba, and so that's one of my reasons of why I'm like, oh, I would love to like learn about sustainable ag in Cuba. Like, this is one of my goals or whatever. I got 3 kids, so it gets harder, right? But so anyway, I think that kind of gets to like necessity does force resilience and creativity, and we just haven't had our hands forced in America around food, right? Like, because we had taken so much land. Like, we gave 40 acres out originally. Now a lot of those farms have, you know, consolidated. Now, like, the average farm is like, you know, 500, 1,000 acres, right? And getting tended by one person in this really mechanized and chemical-filled system. But those farmers are really vulnerable, you know? And I used to be a lot more judgmental towards that type of ag, but now I know that every farmer is in a hard spot. And actually, a lot of my family grows corn seed for, like, Monsanto. So like the organic growers, like, oh, Monsanto's like the Antichrist or something like that. And I'm still like not a huge fan there, but I understand their story as well, where it's like, hey, we have this land and, you know, we have to pay taxes on it and we're gonna lose all this land that we feel, you know, has been in our family for a while and we don't wanna lose it. But I was talking to them and it's like, they're just in this really vulnerable situation. They have no control over the prices that they set. So they're in a commodity market. Corn prices are whatever the commodity market tells them that it is. And then when they're growing for Monsanto, they don't even get to know what seed they're growing. So they're given the seed and they don't even know what it is because it's some genetically modified, patented thing. And so they won't even tell the grower what it is. And then Monsanto sends scouts to their farm and tells them when to spray and what to spray. So they have no control over they have no control over their fertilizer routine or their chemical application. It's completely controlled by Monsanto. They're just subcontractors for that. So they do all that work, and then they have no idea like what they're gonna get. And I was like, well, what are your costs for that? And they're like, oh, around $300 an acre or something like that. But then this last year, you know, all those fertilizer prices doubled on them, so now all of a sudden they're up to $600 an acre. And they can, from the commodity market, get anywhere from $300 to $900 an acre. So if the commodity market tells them $300 an acre, and their costs that year were $600 an acre, they're losing $300 an acre times 1,000, so that's negative 300,000. Or they might be positive 300,000 a year. But what a crazy way to make a living, yeah? And so that just seems highly, highly vulnerable to me. And you know, that way of growing, you know, has like large environmental costs, right? Like that's the reason that Lake Erie is like untenable right now, is because all that potassium runoff is, or phosphorus runoff actually, is hitting that lake, and that's from that kind of agriculture. And so, I mean, that grower doesn't have control over that, you know, but, so I'm not gonna be mad at the farmer. Their hands are tied. Like, I think there's a line about the owner only a pawn in the game. That's how I see that. But, you know, the only way we're gonna get out of that is through a little bit larger sense of imagination, and where we can take a little bit of control back. You know, like, nobody's telling me how I have to grow or what my spray routine is, and so then we can choose good ways to fertilize the land, where we're not doing chemical fertilizer that just goes right through the soil. We're doing very, very minimal pesticide use that's organic, and we're only spraying for potato beetles, and then we spray a bacteria on them that's completely water soluble, and it's like me spraying, I'd say it's like me spraying E. coli on potato plants, and it'd be like a really bad idea for me to spray E. coli on your food, but it's not gonna affect the environment if I do that or not. And so, you know, when consumers buy into that form of agriculture, they're definitely tangentially impacting their footprint to the environment for sure. Yeah, I don't have any more slides, so y'all can just keep asking me tough questions, and then whenever you need to roll out too. Well, I'm right at 12:13, so if you have kids, you're gonna have to roll out. But
Are there different sizes of the CSA?
Yeah, so there's 3 sizes. So there's a quarter share, a half share, and a full share. Normally say a quarter is good for like 1 adult you're gonna pick up every other week. Or it could be just like, I don't know how well this is gonna work out for me, or I go on vacation a lot, whatever the reasons are. And then you sign up for a season, 11-week season. So we actually have 3 11-week seasons, the spring, summer, and fall. We just started our fall share, and it's just about wrapping up. If you really got excited about this and you wanted to get thrown in on the fall share, we could prorate you in. But then, then next year we would do like a spring, summer, fall.
I have a plug for your new soup share program as well. I don't know much about it, but it was offered this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we did just start doing that. Thank you.
Supermarket, looking forward to having this afternoon. But yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah, so we are catering to people like Brian who don't want to cook anymore either. I'm telling y'all, I'm tired of cooking too, because once you have 3 little kids, it wears you down. We also do a soup share now, and so then you can subscribe to every week you pick up a quart of prepared soup, and so then that's available with the vegetables. So maybe you're like, oh, I just want to use my vegetable share to like make salads or something like that, and then you can get a quart of prepared soup, and then the cafe is open the same time that you're picking up your vegetables, so then it's like, go get pizza on Thursday, so I don't have making you cook on Thursday, then grab a soup, and then you can make a salad along with the soup. And trying to make justice easy for y'all, but at the same end, let's just remember justice is work. But my role is to make it as easy as it can be for y'all, but it's still gonna, sometimes they say signing up for a farm share is like signing up for a gym membership. It's very much like that. Like you're kind of committing to this healthy routine, whether you like it or not. And there's going to probably be moments of like, why did I waste my money on this stupid membership? I don't want to go and swim another lap or something like that. But the weeks that you do go to the gym, you'll probably feel like, I'm so grateful that I did that. And so that's how I normally tell people, like, take it in that vein. Like, am I ready to sign up for the gym membership? If you're not in that spot and you know you're never going to go, then just don't. Then just don't do it. Just come and get pizza. But otherwise, yeah.
What are your hours for the pizza on Thursday for the cafe?
Yeah, so it's just every Thursday from 4 to 7. So it's a little window of time.
Oh.
And then
I was sure of it.
that's only going to go till the week before Thanksgiving, so November 16th.
4 to 7.
Yep.
Okay.
And then we're going to be doing 2 nobody even knows this yet, but we're gonna be doing 2 like 5-coursey meal type things between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So just 20 people, like a really high-end fancy meal kind of thing. So if you like our thing, if you scan this QR, then we'll create an account in our system for you, and then when we're sending out communications and stuff like that, then you'll get information on that, or you could like our Facebook page or something like that.
So you mentioned that, is it Grand Rapids is one of the 17 U.S. cities for urban ag, and that's new?
Yeah.
And so, do you know how that's going to impact the area? If there are initiatives, how that may impact what you guys are doing, connecting to other things happening in the city? And
Yeah.
how are they going to do something about the deer?
What is it actually going to do? Yeah, good question.
Because deer, I'm involved in several different food initiatives around, and deer seems to be like not an isolated problem, but
Yeah.
in the whole Grand Rapids area, which is huge for growing food.
Sure. We are excited to figure out what it's going to mean too. We don't know yet either. If you've ever worked with government agencies, you know that it's a little unclear and a little slow moving. And so we're kind of just figuring that out, like it hasn't even really been super publicly announced yet. And I don't think they really knew what they were doing. They just knew they have a problem where if you look at how USDA resources have gone out to the community, they're not going to a lot of people, and they're going to that demographic of just white males generally. And so the USDA is like, hey, we want to make sure that everybody is being serviced. It's interesting because it kind of challenges this narrative sometimes. I feel like of like, oh, it's underserved, like BIPOC or people of color communities that get all this money from the government. That farm bill distributes so much money. I can't even tell y'all, when that COVID thing happened, they were writing checks to farmers for like $200,000, and they didn't say anything about it. I was shocked because we even got like a $10,000 check from the government from COVID. And everybody was all upset about the PPP thing. They gave out way more money to farmers, and that was all just like under the radar to constituents that are often like anti-government, so it's almost like, I see y'all. So anyway, that was a little aside. But yeah, so I think what I know of our project is we're trying to get those partners together and figure out how we can service people who do want to get into farming. In years 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the project, we'd be able to offer microgrants that are to growers that are trying to get into growing. And then they would be teamed up with, we have a cohort of 3 farmers. One of them is myself, and we would do farmer mentoring with them. And so then, oh, okay, you have the site. This is how, when I had this urban site, I figured out how to put a well inside the city of Grand Rapids, because that was a thing, and it took me a lot of time and a lot of leverage to figure out how to, dance through all the hoops with the health department or something like that. So if you were a brand new grower, then hopefully you and I would know each other, and then you could call me and say, I need to figure out irrigation, and then I could come over and talk to you about what we did. And so that's kind of like the bones to that program that we're thinking, and then hopefully that will tie into the USDA having programming that's more tailored towards growers in that situation, because a majority of their programming right now is focused 100% on that 1,000-acre farmer. And now they've learned in the last 10 years they need to start seeing these small-scale organic vegetable growers. They were kind of laughing at them like 20 years ago, like this is a joke. And now the USDA, I think within like the last 10 years, like, oh, okay, at least a segment of USDA is saying like, no, we need to pay attention to these growers. Like, this will look at some of these climate change issues. Like, this is bigger than we thought it was. And so I think we're just starting to get taken seriously. If you would have told me when I started urban growing that the USDA would even be doing what they're doing, I would have just laughed at you. I'd be like, there's no way. But it is totally a work in progress. So we're both hopeful and scared about what happened. But yeah, it's definitely better than nothing. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question other than maybe wait and see.
Yeah, sort of. It's interesting. I hadn't heard of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely get my email if and connect if you're specifically like, oh, I would like to get more into growing or whatever, then we should get connected.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your questions, y'all. Really nice to hear.
Can I quick was in all times and places. Just as Christ was in one time and place, Christ is now in all times and places. Thanks for coming, everybody.